من إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we are on lesson 7 of 8. And today it's going to be somewhat of an easier lesson because we're dealing with things that are not so subtle. What we've seen so far are extremely subtle points that are genuinely lost in most translations. You will see one translator catches it, another one doesn't, right? Or 90% of them don't catch it. Or even if you translate it, you can only translate it with extreme liberality in translation, otherwise it doesn't make sense, as I do a lot. You know, you see my translations are extremely liberal. It's an explanation, not a translation. Okay, so today, inshallah, it's a bit easier. We're looking at something that what's called looking at simply similes and metaphors, classic things that we see in rhetoric, and this is less lost in translation. So inshallah, we're just looking at it because it's important, and so it's important to understand that the power of the Quran. Yes, there are a lot of powerful imagery in the Quran, but that's not to do with what we call the nadariyat al-nazam. Remember, right at the beginning, we talked about playing with variables. We will see some variables you can play with. When you're making a simile, there are certain variables you can play with. It's more the depth of the colors, these kind of things. But the real magic in the Quran is the fact that you have simple words and you just flip this thing there, here, and you change everything. We'll see some of that today, but it's this is a lesser discussion. It's going to be easier for us to understand, but it's not such a deep and fundamental discussion. And so we're looking at, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, the quote from Shakespeare's 18th sonnet, complex forms of simile in the Quran, so comparison. So we mentioned our problem again, do we know Arabic, or do we understand the taste, the differences? And again, this is something that's easier to grasp. These are things because, again, the concept of simile, something X is like Y, or this is something that exists in all languages, it's easier to grasp. So that the gap here is much smaller. It's not such a big deal. Okay, so when we say Zayd is as tall as a giraffe, it's a simile. X is like Y. Simple things like that. Zayd is like a lion in bravery. Right? So you're comparing two things. Zayd, comparing him to a lion, and there's something called a wajh shabah. How are they similar? Right? How are they similar? For example, as tall, as brave. Right? When you say Zayd is like a lion, you're not thinking that he has 4 legs. Yes, a lion has 4 legs, but that's not what you're thinking about. Right? And sometimes these things are lost in translation. So, for example, I was discussing this with the translator. How would you translate this into Arabic? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So imagine you go to rainy England, where it's grey all the time, and someone is talking to their beloved and saying, you're like a summer's day. As opposed to, what does it mean in Arabic? Summer's day is hell. Right? Even the Prophet ﷺ said, the heat of the summer is from the blaze of the hellfire. It was not a nice thing. So how would you translate that? So that's an example of something lost in translation. If you translate it into Arabic, what do you mean? I'm hot and uncomfortable and difficult. What do you mean? Right? It's even in the Quran, you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the blessing of clothes and says it protects you from the cold and from the heat. Whereas in English culture, I wouldn't really think of the clothes protecting you from the heat. It's not such a big deal. But obviously, in the desert, you have extreme cold because you don't have much, cloud coverage, but then extreme heat. Right? And so, clothes are a very important thing. Hence the turban, right? Something to protect you from the heat. So a metaphor then, in our, usually we refer to this metaphor as Zayd is a giraffe, like he's so tall that he's a giraffe. Zayd is a lion. Technically, we don't consider this to be majaz, we don't consider it to be metaphor in Arabic, but that doesn't really matter. That's to do with the technicalities of these things. So now there's some complex similes. Giraffes are almost as tall as Zayd. So usually you should have it the other way around. Zayd he's so tall, he's almost as tall as a giraffe. Now I flipped it. And I said he's so tall, the giraffes are almost as tall as him. Right? So there's complexity in that I flipped the normal order of things. So there's some kind of levels of complexity. Rather, it is lions that are as brave as Zayd. Right? Zayd is not as brave as a lion, rather it's so the braveness is more apparent in Zayd than it is in lion. This is called a tashbih al-maqlub. Right? It's flipped. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. So, Shakespeare scratching his head saying, I don't really know how to praise you and describe what you're like. Should I compare you to a summer's day? So the rhetorical question automatically makes it complex, gives another flavor to it. And then he says, well, actually, I can't do that. So, i.e., you are more beautiful than a summer's day. Right? So there's a level of complexity there, hence, using this as the title of today's lesson. So we're going to be looking at simple similes in the Quran. We're going to look at one possible example of an inverted simile, right? Like lions are almost as brave as Zayd. Looking at parables, and then looking at metaphor in the Quran and direct and implicit. There's many, many different types of metaphor. There's a whole branch of metaphor that has nothing to do with similarity. Right? So when I say, for example, today the king was born, meaning the prince who will be the king one day, you're not saying that he's like a king. You're saying that he will become a king. So the relationship between the two things is that one will become that thing, or one was once that thing, right? Or one causes, you say, oh, hello, trouble, to a little child, meaning somebody who will cause trouble. So you're not saying you are like trouble. So there's a whole branch of metaphor that has nothing to do with similarity, right? But then there's a whole other branch of metaphor that does, right? So that's called majaz morsa, and I'm not even going to look at that. So simple similes. وَالْقَمَرَ قَدَّرْنَاهُ مَنَازِلَ حَتَّى عَادَ كَالْعُرْجُونِ الْقَدِيمِ أعوذ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. And we organize the moon. We apportion its stages until it returns as thin as a dried date leaf. Right? So a simple comparison there. Something that you're familiar with, date leaf, and this simple comparison there. وَلَهُ الْجَوَارِ الْمُنْشَآتُ فِي الْبَحْرِ كَالْأَعْلَامِ. And his are the ships and jawari. So when you say jariya, it has three meanings in Arabic. Jariya means, from the word jara, yajri, to run. So jariya means a little girl who runs around. Jariya. Jariya means a female slave, because she runs around, going from here to there, do this, do that for it, right? Jariya. Right? It's a bit like the racial comment, boy. Right? You might be familiar with that in the past. You see somebody who is African American, they say boy or girl. It's a racial comment, meaning you're not at the level of a man or a woman. You serve men and women, right? So that word ghulam and jariya, they exist in the slave sense as well, right? Al-jawari, so jariya means a little girl. It means a slave, a female slave, and it also means a spring, jariya, because it runs, spring, right? It's called a jariya. But it also means ships, because they run on the surface of the water. So it's lahul jawari. So his are the jawari al-munsha'atu fil bahri kal-alam. His are the ships that are sent into the sea, as large as distinctively large mountains. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning the huge blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, look, how you're able to transport one thing to the other. You effectively have a mountain sitting in the sea, but because of the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's waiting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created things, it floats. Right? So it's a blessing. Right? So his are the ships that are sent into the sea, as large as, so X like Y, simple similarity. وحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن. So we would label this as metaphor in English, because there's no like and there's no as. So in English you say Zayd is like a lion, it's a simile. Zayd is a lion, it's a metaphor, right? Now in Arabic science of the word rhetoric, they don't label that as metaphor per se. Why? Because it's like whenever you have the two sides, it's considered comparing X with Y. Right? When is it considered metaphor? When you say I pray today, I prayed behind a lion, meaning Zayd. So now there's no X and Y. It's just the Zayd has become a lion. Right? So it's a slightly different mental and linguistic process. But anyway, it's not a big deal, right? It's not a course of balagh. So he says, it has been made permissible for you on the nights of the fast to be intimate with your wives. They are a garment for you and you are a garment for them. I.e., they are like a garment for you in wajh shabah, similarity, in closeness. Garment is close to your body. Intimateness is close to your body. The warmth and the protection you give and receive, and you are a garment for them. So this is simple tashbih, right? إن الله يحب الذين يقاتلون في سبيله صفا كأنهم بنيان مرصوص. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed Allah loves those who fight in His way in rows, as if they were a building fortified with molten lead. So imagine, for example, you build, you get, for example, bricks, okay? And then you put a wall around it, and then you pour molten lead into it, fill in all the gaps. It's completely solid. That's the idea of it, right? So this is how we pray, and that's how the angels pray, and that's how the believers fight in jihad. So the comparison there. So the comparison is deep in that. That's a quite a graphic explanation. But essentially, it's just the structure is quite simple. X is like Y. And then obviously the wajh al-shabah is so obvious it doesn't need to be mentioned. How is it similar? In its strength, right? In its togetherness, in its. وترى الجبال تحسبها جامدة وهي تمر مر السحاب. And you see mountains thinking that they are solid and firm, when in reality they are passing like clouds. I.e., a cloud is in the sky, it is not firm at all. You'll see it now and it's gone tomorrow. Similarly, the mountains, even though they appear to be strong, they are passing just as clouds pass. Right? And in reality here, they are not being compared. The mountains are not being compared to the clouds. Rather, the passing of the mountains is being compared to the passing of the clouds. Right? Just like in the hadith, you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah like the moon. He's not going to be like the moon. I remember being a 14-year-old, I was quite bright at school, but it's just, things are difficult to click in your head. Like imagining Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a circle, because that's the hadith, So Allah, you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as you see, so you'll see Him like you see the moon. So the comparison is not between Allah and the moon. The comparison is between you're seeing Allah and you're seeing the moon. The seeing process. But just as it's very easy for all of you to not crowd each other out and see something clearly there, you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same way. So comparison here of two actions, not comparison of two items or two things. But anyway, I put this in the wrong place. Don't manage. I'll come back to this inshallah ta'ala. So I'll come back to that second. I just put that in the wrong place. Inverted similes. So examples of inverted similes I mentioned was, Zayd is not like a lion, rather lions are like Zayd. It's that inversion, right? You've given that. It's essentially the same comparison. You gave it spice, right? Arguably, this is an example of it in the Quran, right? But arguably it's not, right? So I caught my teacher in Jordan. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, or 1 o'clock in the morning in Jordan. I sent her a message. I had just typed this one up, and I was like, this is, I remember this being discussed by some scholars as an example. I said, is this, are there any other examples of inverted similes in the Quran? He said, arguably this, but the right position is it isn't. But anyway, we'll just for argument's sake. So they say, إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَا. Right? They say, trade is obviously just like interest. What's the difference? If you can rent out a car, why can't you rent out money? It's the same thing. I have a microphone. I have the use of this microphone. You don't have the use of this microphone. I give you the use of the microphone for 1 day and you pay me $1. Okay, I have the use, I have cash, I can use this I have the use of capital. I'm now going to give you the use of that capital, and obviously I don't have something and you have it now, so you're going to pay me for that, right? Makes sense, right? What's the difference between renting money and renting, some other item, right? What's the difference? So they said trade is obviously, innama, is obviously just like interest. Okay, what's the difference? وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. Yeah, but Allah's made this halal, made one thing halal, the other thing haram. And so, just as a kind of side point, the ulama, they disagree exactly with the reason why. But some of them they suggest, they say, what is the issue? What do we learn from the fact that you can rent, you can pay for a service or an item, you can't pay for money. Is that money is not something sort of in and of itself. It's just the means to transfer. So instead of bartering, exchanging a laptop for a phone for here we go, I'm going to give you every month I'm going to pay my rent in phones, or I'm going to pay I'm going to be paid your salary in pieces of bread, right? You're going to have something that is a tool for you to easily used for something else. It just gives that liquidity, that that's the exact word we use, that ability to exchange different things with ease, right? Whereas, so it's just a tool. So gold and silver and the monetary equivalents are just tools. They're not something sort of in and of themselves. And that's why, for example, people like Mufti Taqi Uthmani, when they're talking about Islamic finance, they often they'll say, yeah, there's Islamic finance, but then there's Islamic ethics. So Islamic finance, these are the conditions for a valid, for example, currency exchange, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But they'll add in Islamic ethics in terms of like, what is the Sharia looking for? Does the Sharia want you to buy and sell euros and dollars and yen? No, because you're just playing with numbers. Like there's nothing happening. As opposed to, for you investing, for example, in Tesla, you are promoting technology. You are doing, arguably, some of the ulama, they mentioned, what is our khilafah? How are we the khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth? It's because we're here to develop things. We're supposed to live life and do things. So are you just making things one number turn into another number, or are you actually promoting something? So it's a lot of it's not something agreed upon, but so the idea of then what's the difference between renting out a car and renting out $10? Why is it that it's haram for me to rent out $10 and get a percentage back, as opposed to with that same $10 or $10,000 I can go and buy something and rent it out? What's the difference? Is that the maqsid is not there. What you're making money out of money. What you're supposed to be making, somebody using a car is a maqsid shar'i. Somebody driving from here to Danville and dropping somebody off is something that you're supposed to be doing, living life, doing things, as opposed to just turning one thing into something else is pointless. Right? Allahu Akbar. So that's when you see, for example, when you say, for example, what's the difference between a conventional loan and Islamic loan? Say, well, yeah, in reality there isn't much. On an ethical level, there isn't much. The system is the self-same system. On the economic level, on the global level, it's the same thing. You're not solving anything Islamically. On the micro level, you're avoiding riba. So alhamdulillah, right? But it's kind of like marrying a prostitute, basically. Forgive my French, right? It's like, that's the kind of difference. It's like, well, you go to Sheikh Hassan and say, well, is this zina? It's not zina. So it's not, because you're married to her. Okay, but at the end of the day, it's like the system that she lives in is the same system. It's still kind of like, what's going on here, right? It's essentially the same system. But there is a difference, right? One is halal and one is haram, right? Are you directly involved in the riba? No, you're not. Okay, alhamdulillah. You meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're innocent, as opposed to somebody who's like, well, I don't care. It's not, there is a difference. It's another discussion. So anyway, they say trade is obviously like interest. Or were they actually saying interest is obviously just like trade? So if they were saying, hey, interest is fine, because it's just like trade, and then they flipped it, and they're saying, hey, it's so much, interest is so much like trade, that actually trade is almost like interest. So if you say it's haram to make interest, then it's haram to make money, because it's the same thing, right? So arguably, they were saying this, riba is just like trade. And then they flipped it in a very rhetorical way. And they said trade, and the meaning trade is just like interest. So that's an argument, but again, it's debated. Otherwise, that's the only example Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala I'm familiar with in the Quran. Okay, then parables. So the parable we just sort of skipped was here, right? So how do you find a parable on the Quran? Google Quran mathal. Mathal in Arabic, it means a parable, right? They call it a mathal, or it's called an umthula, right? Words on the pattern of uf'ula are like big things, like ubtula. Ubtula is like a big, fat, false thing. Ukduba, the fattest, ugliest lie you could ever imagine. Ustura, like the greatest story you've ever imagined, right? So umthula is like a parable, or what's the word? Allegory, right? This word allegory, umthula. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله كمثل حبة أنبتت 7 سنابل في كل سنبلة 100 حبة والله يضاعف لمن يشاء والله واسع عليم. So what is happening in a parable is the parable itself is X like Y? Am I saying, for example, look, this is like this and that they're both black? No. I'm saying, you sitting here in front of me while I'm talking, it's like, so that whole complex system, the fact that someone's talking, someone's listening, this whole complex system is like this other complex system, and I'm trying to help you understand it. That's a parable, right? So that's why, what is it, Aesop's fables. They're talking about certain things that happen to everybody in life, and they express it as a story between a huntsman and a wolf and a this and a that. Right? To have that whole complex picture is like this complex picture. Let's call it non-thought. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the scenario, the parable of those who spend their money in the way of Allah is like a seed that brings forth 7 ears of wheat. In each ear there is 100 seeds. Allah multiplies the reward for whomever He wills, and Allah is generous and all-knowing. So just like this thing comes out of the ground, the money comes out of their pocket. But then, as it comes out, it spreads and spreads and spreads. There's multiple things in it, same thing, multiple things happening. This way of and so many of the scholars have written specifically, taken the parables out of the Quran and explained them. It covers it. We find many people have done that. So we mentioned that parables. So we said one picture, one conflict, one intertwined system is like another. That's what we're talking about. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا. It's just the parable of those who were given the task of preserving and applying the Torah, the Jews, but then failed to do so, is like a donkey that is carrying volumes of books. So we have the donkey. The donkey is weighed down by this heavy weight. So in this of subhanAllah, everything that talks about the Jews applies to us. When we half apply the Sharia, it's like, well, you have the difficulty, we don't have the ease. Apply the Sharia 100% and it's easy. It makes life easy for you. When you half apply the Sharia, just like the Jews, half kind of thing, don't eat this, don't eat this, don't eat this, don't eat this, but then you're not even accepting Islam. You don't have the Jamal in your life. It's just rules and these things. It's just an annoyance, right? Like somebody, for example, who prays 5 times a day, but they don't even focus. There's no beauty, there's no lazzat in what they're doing. They don't like praying. It's just annoying. And so for them, it's pure delayed gratification. It's just, khalas, I got to get this done because otherwise I'm going to go to hell. As opposed to somebody who's like, mashallah, what did the Prophet say? Arihna bis-salah or bil-adhan. I can't remember the hadith. You remember the hadith? And one of the two, he said, the point is, arihna bis-salah or arihna bil-adhan ya Bilal. Where it's like, Prophet his whole ishq, his whole life is the prayer. So he's like, Bilal, relieve us, give us relief by calling adhan. It's like we're going to sit down and have a cool, can of Coke, or not a can of Coke, cold Coke in a bottle, right? Something like that. Where it's like something that's like, this is really nice, right? We love praying. I like it. It's easy. It's nice, right? As opposed to somebody who's like, they don't really jump in fully. Then they're like a donkey carrying books. So you have this book. Every single volume is tremendous. Has light in it. Has something can change their life. But all they experience of it is the weight of it. But they don't benefit from it at all, and they could never benefit from it at all. Like a donkey, it doesn't matter what he does, he can never benefit from the books, right? So it's like that. And this is reality. You see that many times. Many of us fall through ignorance. We make the deen very difficult, and it really hurts me. So the other day, someone was telling me, they said, there's a sister. She's very religious. She had a bad relationship before with her husband. She got divorced, etc. Really abusive relationship, and she's kind of put off marriage. And now she's in a haram relationship with another Muslim man. I was like, how long does it take to do a nikah? Like probably 10 seconds. It's like, he's Muslim, you're Muslim, you're muhajjaba, you send your kids to Muslim school. Is it really that difficult? And what was the answer? I was teaching this person. They said, because people don't know. People think you have to get wedding, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do these different things. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's nice, and that's part of the spirit of Islam. Also, I'm told it should be a social thing. Yeah, but why is a religious woman committing zina? Like, why? It's like, you can understand, again, she's deeply in love with a non-Muslim, and there's no way to get married, you can't do anything. She goes to the sheikh says, well, listen, you've got to make a choice, 1, 2, 3, 5. It's like, he's a Muslim. Just call him up and say, bro, it's not that difficult. You really have to do that? The difference in halal and haram, the difference in sadaqah and haram, right? Like the difference in something that Allah loves, something Allah hates. Like really that difficult? And this is scenarios like these Jews. Imagine you sit there your whole life memorizing the Torah and doing this law and that law and all these different things, and at the end of the day you're going to hellfire forever because you hate Islam, you hate the process of it, you hate You hate the good that's going to come to you in this life and the next. Right? So this is my favorite line of Shakespeare is "Thou art an ass." Right? That's there's a I can't think which much ado about nothing or something like that. Maybe another one, but that's what it is, like a genuine, donkey. May Allah forgive us. May Allah protect us. Okay, another example. اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. And then Allah mentions something else. So the first point it mentions, realize that this life is only and obviously mere play, indefinite. لعب. It's just some kind of lame, pointless exercise. Like imagine if I sat here the whole day doing like this. I'd say, you want to play football? Like, and I'm playing a game. What are you playing? I'm playing flick the thing of my... Like, that's not a game. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the dunya is like that. Right? Jack someone up with the highest, most amazing hit of heroin or cocaine. That's nothing that's nothing compared to stubbing a toe on a pebble in paradise. Right? This is what it is. It doesn't really mean anything. The highest possible pleasure in this life is worthless. Right? So it says it's just a game and a distraction. And notice again, how would you say in Arabic, competing with each other in money? At-takathur. Alhaakum at-takathur, right? At-takathur is competing with each other who can have the most. But he says takathur, indefinite, a kind of like pathetic, some petty show and boasting, and just some dumb competition. Notice these words are coming up from the indefinite in wealth and family size. And then it comes into what we're talking about. كَمَثْلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا ثُمَّ يَكُونُ حُطَامًا. It is like what? It is just like some much needed rain. غَيْث word غَوْث, right? This thing has come to help you. Much needed rain, whose crops give joy to the farmers. Who identified the word that's used for farmers? You can see the word that's used for farmers in the ayah. كَمَثْلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الكُفَّارِ. Right. So kuffar, farmers are called kuffar because they cover over the soil. So a kafir is not a non-Muslim. Kafir is like, not interested. Right? Like I had a friend at school who was very clever. I was like, okay, so you now understand that God exists. He's like, yeah. Okay, well, who cares then? Meaning, mentally I understand that what you're talking about. Emotionally, I couldn't care less. Like it's irrelevant to me. It's not interesting. It's just I'm not interested. Right? They ignore it. They subdue it. They're covering the truth. I know what the truth is, but I'm not interested in it. As opposed to I never heard of it in my life. Right? I never heard of it. Yeah, I don't know if I told you to tell too many stories, but I was buying an Eid gift to my wife, and explaining to this lady, Vietnamese lady, I think she was, called Eid, and she's like, Eid, Muslim, she doesn't know what Eid means, and what Muslim means, or what Islam means, anything. She knows something about henna, that her niece did henna once with some Indian lady. That's her only connection to Islam. That's it. So then she's like, right at the end, I buy this gift, and she's like, you know what? Given that this thing, you have this celebration, I have something for you. So okay. She goes and gets a bottle of champagne for me. So I'm like, sorry, just thank you very much, but we don't drink today. Okay, no idea. So she's a kafir. Yawm al-Qiyamah, she's a kafira, and she has no clue whatsoever, like no idea whatsoever about Islam or anything, right? Other people who are like, yeah, they know what this is, right? It's different. Right? Many people know about Islam, but many people have no clue whatsoever, zero, like no idea. Again, Muslim, Islam, I don't even know what that means, right? Okay, so anyway, so kuffar, so what is it? It says, so what is the dunya? It is like this much needed rain. So when it comes, mashallah, it's all these things. It's rain, or everything grows, everything's happy, excuse me, but then dries up and becomes something completely yellow, and then just merely crushed straw. So the end result was what? It looks amazing, but the end result was nothing. Right? That's the difference. How can we turn it into is through intentions. Every single thing. Everything we see in the dunya, we can only keep it through what we do with it. Our relationship with other people, our money, our health, our wealth, our time, our whatever it is, we can only keep it and make it into the akhirah with our intention, what we do with it. Otherwise, we can't keep any of it. والذين كفروا أعمالهم كسراب بقيعة يحسبه الظمآن ماء حتى إذا جاءه لم يجده شيئا ووجد الله عنده فوفاه حسابه والله سريع الحساب. So those who believe, those who have disbelieved for good, right? That was that past tense being used, right? الذين كفروا, finalized. Their efforts are like a mirage. Now, I've missed the word here. A mirage on a plane. Yeah, right? That plane. Otherwise, you don't get mirages on the light. So, mirage. I believe the word mirage is Arabic from the word mi'raj. Allahu Akbar. Because it makes you go up. Mi'raj. Good. Well, yeah. Then a parched person. So, anadhani means I'm thirsty. Anadham'an, I am so thirsty I can't even hear what you're telling me. Right? So this person's like, oh, subhanAllah, parched person, would reckon to be water. But then when he eventually gets to it, doesn't find it to be anything. So here, this is the parable, right? The parable of the dunya is like the parable of the mirage. You get there, you get there, and you get there, and you get there, and you get there. And then you realize you're hardly there, and you're hardly there, and you're hardly there, and then you finally get there, and it's nothing. It wasn't working. But this is the ajib thing in this thing. It says, we are now shifting from the parable. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the person who strives after the dunya and then dies and meets Allah, as one thing, is compared to the scenario of somebody who's thirsty and traveling in the desert and comes to a mirage and then finds nothing. But the ajib thing is, and suddenly you jump from the compared thing to straight back to here. Right? And the Prophet does the same thing. He says, I am to you like a man who builds a fire. And then the flies and the moths start flying into the fire, so he starts pushing them away. And here I am grabbing you by your very belts, and you're falling away from my hands into the hellfire. So there's a picture of a person, and then suddenly he turns into another thing that's similar to it. It's still metaphorical, and then you're also in reality. So there's multiple levels of where things are, right? And so this is where you see, you see quite a lot of subtleties. So this is quite a subtle point here. But rather finds Allah right in front of him, who then gives him his full recompense. So in the scenario of the mirage, you don't actually meet Allah, do you? You just die then because there's no water. But again, bring it so close that you're actually there immediately. And gives him his full recompense, and Allah is quick to give recompense, right? And so working 12 hours a day for the rest of your life is not dunya. Working 12 hours for the sake of dunya is dunya. If you're going to, for example, I am supporting 12 orphanages in 11 countries. See that? Go ahead. It's fine. So running non-stop is not a problem. Running non-stop for no reason. أو كظلمات في بحر لجي يغشاه موج من فوقه سحاب ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها. A good example. Does anybody speak Arabic? How many Arabs here? Right. It's a very good book. It contains some haram things in it, but it is a very good book. It's called Hadrat al-Muhtaram by Naguib Mahfouz, the very famous Riwa'i, Egyptian Masri. Right. So Naguib Mahfouz, he always talks about some haram things, right? But he's a very good, and that book is very, very good. Right? It's very, very good. It's a perfect picture of the person who's running after the dunya. Hadrat al-Muhtaram, this guy who's trying to get his work of his way one by one, every single thing, losing things in his dunya, losing everything, losing his akhirah, losing everything, and then he dies one day before he gets to where he is. And all he wants is to be buried in this particular place, and that doesn't happen. It's just very, very good book. There's one line in it. He says, he quotes Imam Shafi. He said, "Al-waqtu kasayf idha lam taqta'u qata'ak." Imam Shafi said, "Time is like a sword. If you don't cut it, it will cut you." So what does Naguib Mahfouz say? Naguib Mahfouz says, "Al-waqtu kasayf idha lam taqtulhu qatalak." Right? He says, time is like a sword. If you don't kill it, not cut it. If you don't kill it, it will kill you. Right? Right? And so we have to understand that our methodology in Islam is we respect people for the good they have. We don't label somebody just because they have one bad thing. We label them as something else. So if somebody says, for example, they have some crazy idea, yeah, but they're really good here. They're really good there, right? Because there's many. One of my teachers was quoting who was it? Abu Nawas. Abu Nawas is a famous Abbasid poet who was really into young men. Like, talks about wine, talks about like basically homosexual stuff, talks about all sorts of things, right? But he mentioned, you know, one of his lines of poetry is very deep. He said, what is it? He said, "Isqini khamran, qul innaha khamrun, wala tasqini jahran in wala tasqini sirran in amkana jahru." He says, "Give me some wine and tell me it's wine, and don't pour me wine secretly when you can do it in public." So he said, "Well, what do you benefit from that? Is the point of when you recite the Quran, you recite aloud. I can hear it with this. I'm doing it with my lips. I'm all connected, right? And so we look for the good in everybody, and we don't say, oh, but he's this and he's that. We don't have the cancel culture. That's what we have today. Oh, Sheikh so-and-so is no good. There's no perfect Sheikh. Doesn't exist. Let alone people not shuyukh. Right? When you have this oh, he's siyasi, he's politics, everybody has a problem. Every single person has a problem. No, the Prophet ﷺ died. Okay? Khalas, right? And so when you have this kind of attitude, it's not good. But when you look for people, what's good in everybody, so Naguib Mahfouz is like, he's really good. Yeah, he has some problems, but he's really good. You know, same thing, Iqbal, right? Oh, he's like this. Yeah, he's really good. And his poetry will change your life. But yeah, there's pros and cons about everybody. Right? Same thing. Anyway, so the dunya. He says, أو كظلمات في بحر مبني يغشاه موج من فوقه موج من فوقه سحاب ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها ومن لم يجعل الله له نور فما له من نور. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or they and their efforts are like someone in dark clouds in the midst of a deep ocean. Now, where do I get the word now from? From the mudari, the present tense verb. It's happening now. Now, countless waves, the indefinite is used, countless waves come right over his min fawqihi. In Arabic you say, as-saqf fawqa ra'si. The ceiling is above my head. Lakin yadi min fawqa ra'si. It's from here up. Right, so min is right here, starting from here and up. Min ba'd. Right? ثم اتخذتم العجل من بعده. Then just after he just went and you start worshipping an idol just straight away. Right? That's min ba'd, not ba'da, min ba'd. Right? Straight after him. Right? And so it says min ظلمات so موج من فوقي موج من فوقي سحاب. So you have this idea of like cakedness. He's here, then layers upon layers of darkness, and then upon that there's layers upon layers of darkness. There's no gap in between. There's no relief, whatever. Right above these many waves are more clouds. Countless clouds, countless clouds of darkness above one another. When he looks at his hand, he can hardly even see it. Right? And that's where we are today. You don't even know who you are. You don't even know who you are. You've lost your whole identity. Right? People who sue their parents and these kind of things. So you don't even know who you are. Right? You've lost yourself. And whomever, I should say, whomever Allah has not given light, has no light whatsoever. Where does the word whatsoever come from? فَمَا لَهُ مِن نُورٍ. مَا لَهُ نُورًا. He doesn't have any light. مَا لَهُ مِن نُور. He doesn't have any light whatsoever. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. So people say in the Quran, the whole Quran is true, right? So there's no such thing as majaz in the Quran. Because majaz means not true. So, well, billahi alayk. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Is that حقيقي or is that majaz? It's majaz. Right? If you read Winnie the Pooh, they look for the North Pole, and they're literally looking for a pole, right? And they find this pole, and alhamdulillah, that's the end of the story, right? When I'm not reading Winnie the Pooh, I'm reading the Quran, right? This إهدنا الصراط المستقيم is the deen al-haq, right? It's not, there's no path, like, is that the mustaqim? Come on, guys, right? And this is kind of, it gets a bit ridiculous. You say, no, there's no majaz in the Quran. Because that would mean that there's kadhib in the Quran. Majaz is not kadhib, it's balagha, two different things completely. Right? It's like saying a joke is lying. So it's not. So ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, give us or guide us to live a life that leads straight to your good pleasure, or guide us to the deen that leads straight to Jannah, the thing that leads us to our goal. That is like a straight path. That's what it means. So as-sirat al-mustaqim means straight path, a way that will get you to your goal, whatever that goal is, in the best way possible. Right? ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ خَشِيَ الْعَنَةَ مِنْكُمْ. That is for those who fear al-'anat minkum. So this verse is talking about what? It's talking about the marrying someone else's slave. So you can marry a free woman, they're your wife, or you can marry someone else's slave. In which case, what happens is you're married to someone else's property. Your child is going to be born into slavery. So that's haram, you can't do that. Because it's someone else, it's like the product of someone else's property. You can't do that. When can you do that? When it's not possible to get married. You can't marry anybody, you don't have the mahar, you don't have the abilities, you marry someone else's slave girl. Right? So ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ خَشِيَ الْعَنَةَ مِنْكُمْ الْعَنَةَ هِيَ الزِّنَا. Right? So what does anat mean in Arabic? It means the breaking of bones. So somebody is on the point of committing haram and it's like, I'm going to break. Okay, then you go ahead. Okay, that's called al-anat. Okay. So that dispensation is for whomever fears committing fornication, which is as difficult for him as having his bones broken. Right? So this is, Islam is a real religion. Like, people need to be married. Right? People need to be married. Right? And so it's like, it's not that difficult. Alhamdulillah, we're not, in Egypt. I know people lived in Egypt. Egypt's like, you don't earn any money, yet everyone has this crazy idea that when you get married, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, mashallah, how many times do you want me to commit haram before I get married then? At 45, if ever I get married. It's impossible, right? And so alhamdulillah, we're in the West, we don't have these taqalid, we don't have all these things. It's quite easy for you to your parents to say, yeah, sorry, I just want to get married. And it's like, well, you don't have a date, and you don't have this, you don't have that. It's okay, just work it out. We can do that. And so, unfortunately, Muslims, still, they're in scenarios like, but I'm not sure about this, what about that? It's like, it's not that difficult. Just get married. It's okay, Ideally, you find the right person. Ideally, you're financially stable. Ideally, this, that. But is it worth committing a haram? It's not. It's not worth committing a haram. It's like people have to be realistic. It's like, yeah, you're not an angel. I'm not an angel. He's not an angel. She's not an angel. Nobody's angels. We're not angels. We're realistic, we're human beings. You have needs, you have financial needs, food, you need emotional needs, and you have physical needs, and that's quite important as physical need for men and for women. Be realistic, get married. Simple as that. Not the end of the world. Inshallah, Sheikh Hassan and I were starting what's it called, Get Married in 5 Minutes website. It costs a lot of money, but it's worth it. You get this money, you will get your money's worth. All about the next 5 khutbahs are going to be promo this, alhamdulillah. And we've already got your credit card details from that, everyone's, mashallah, giving the donations every week, so we have the information. Right. U'ak wa shuyukh. Right. You said that in the Masri, u'ak, right? Be careful of shuyukh, right? Religious people. وَخْفِضْ جَنَاحَكَ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and lower your wing for the believers. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, lower your wing for the believers and treat them as a mother bird does for his chicks. So when you deal with believers, be soft and nice and kind, and treat them like your little bird. You see how a chick, for example, a mother bird deals with the chicks. Right, so this is the other side about you just get married. Fine, I got married, but this person is not suitable at all. Yeah, but you just told me don't commit zina, right? So that's the flip side of it. Is marrying somebody who is not on your level at all. You pray 5 times a day, she does not pray 5 times a day. And in fact, you married her and you realize that she's cheating on you. Well, surprise, surprise, because that's why you can marry her so easily. Right? Or vice versa. Right? So this is the flip side. Why is it then in traditional societies marriage is so difficult? It's because we don't want that kind of scenario. Somebody can get married that easily. Right? Imagine again, you meet some lady literally in 5 minutes she wants to marry you. It's a bit strange. Or a guy says, yeah, I'll marry you. Okay. You don't get the sense that this is going to be a person who is going to be around for a long time. Right? So now don't take لا تتخذوا بطانا من دونكم, somebody who's less than you. Right? So at the same time you should marry. The Prophet said, عليك بذات الدين تربت يداك. Right? Make sure you marry a super religious woman. Right? ذات الدين is not متدينة. ذات الدين means solidly religious. Right? So do not take as close allies and spouses non-Muslims, because so it doesn't mention because this is my thing. لا تتخذوا من دونكم بطانة. Bitana is the inner lining of your clothes. The thing that touches your clothes, that's called your bitana. So do not take as close allies and spouses bitana, non-Muslims, because just as they will be close to you, you will be vulnerable to them. Right? That's the bitana, right? يحيي الأرض بعد موتها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives life to the earth after it's dead. What does it mean? I.e., Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the earth flourish with crops and plants after it is barren, just as if He gives life to it and death to it. It's not really alive, right? And so therefore, just as you see this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do that in your qiyamah. That's the next analogy. Again, it's metaphorical comparison. فَأَذَاقَهُ اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ. So Allah punished them with hunger and fear. Again, this is a very loose translation. Literally, Allah made them taste the garment of hunger and fear. That's literally speaking. Allah made, but you can't eat the garment. What does it mean? It means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them with hunger and fear that surrounded them like a garment, and that they tasted with their tongues. It was so close to them that they could almost taste. Because they used to persist in calculated sin. Where does that come from? Right? Masna' is a factory. You work things out, make things with itqan. Sana'ahu, he made it with effort and carefulness. So bima kanu yasna'un, they were shatareen. They knew exactly what they were doing. Calculated sin. They continued doing these things. So what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فَأَذَاقَهُمُ اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them taste the garment of hunger and fear. Right? And so notice the pun here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them with fear and made them taste it. So the pun is that you taste is the opposite of food. Right? So this is again another level to it, where you can strengthen. You can sometimes get a simile or something like that. You can strengthen it and strengthen it and strengthen it. You almost start thinking it's real. أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى فما ربحت تجارتهم وما كانوا مهتدين. Those crazy people out there, where do I get that word from? أولئك بعيدين, really far, right? So they're not physically far, but they are far off the way. Those crazy people way out over there are those who have chosen misguidance over guidance. When they bought it, they didn't really buy. You don't buy misguidance or guidance. You choose one thing over the other, thinking that it will benefit. But when you buy, what do? You say, I'm going to sell you this for this, because for me, the money is more beneficial to me, and to you, the microphone is more beneficial to you. So they looked at misguidance and said, MashaAllah, misguidance is really good for me, MashaAllah. Right? So it's the opposite. And that's why you have the word shira. As if they were buying. But to their surprise, the first for ta'kis, the opposite happened. Fama, right? You say, akramtuhu fa'ahanani. Right? That's the fa is for ta'kis, the opposite. Right? But to their surprise, the exchange that they made did not help them. So they were like people who sold at loss. So he has the pun, the comparison of buying, and then strengthens that idea with the idea of selling. And if you keep going and going and going, it eventually becomes an umthul, as mentioned, becomes an allegory, but it's not. Sheikh Hassan, do we have? Right, we have. Okay, I'll just do one or two more things. So, وَلَمَّا سَكَتَ عَنْ مُوسَى الْغَضَبِ. This is what we call isti'ara al-makniyya. Isti'ara al-makniyya is when you compare two things, but in a hidden way. Right? There's no policeman here, that's it. Okay. So you say, for example, no oinked the policeman. What does that mean? Right? So what animal oinks? Right? I didn't say that. I just implied that, right? So that's behind, right? So I'll get home safely. وَلَمَّا سَكَتَ عَنْ مُوسَى الْغَضَبِ. So it says when what? So سَكَتَ عَنْهُ, he stopped speaking to him. So it said when anger stopped speaking to Musa, i.e. as if it was some kind of creature on his shoulder speaking in his ear. Right? أَخَذَ الْأَلْوَاحِ. Right? So this elf-like or creature that's sitting on his shoulder is called anger, is talking to him. Right? So this is, when you say sakata, it means a thing that speaks. And so you're implicitly telling me that anger is some kind of creature, some kind of thing. So this is what we call isti'ara makniyya, right? Or isti'ara bil kinaya, an indirect way of doing it. Just one more last example. بل نقذف بالحق على الباطل فيدمغه فإذا هو زاهق. Right? Rather, we throw truth against falsehood. So that's a parable. You don't throw truth, right? But it's now. But then what? There's a whole picture. There's an implicit picture that I have here. That there's something called truth and falsehood. One is thrown at the other. Okay, what happens? فَيَدْمَغُهُ. It has a dimag, it has a brain, and it's now smashed in. Falsehood almost has a head that's smashed in. And it slithers away. So now you're telling me that it's not just, it's a whole picture now. You've added all these things that make a picture that it's almost as if there's truth and there's falsehood, and one thing is an animal and it's like being killed, its head was smashed in, and now it's trying to slither away and die. Right? That is the false and the truth with the falsehood. And inshallah we'll stop here. Subhanallah bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. So there's many more things here. Inshallah we'll come back to this maybe next week.